Hi everyone, welcome to the latest edition of the Legends of Tomorrow podcast. We're currently on episode 5, and this week we are highlighting Vandal Savage, the big bad of the upcoming show. With us today is our co-host, Kat, and unfortunately she's a little under the weather today.
Yeah, sorry guys, but I'm still here and excited to talk some Vandal Savage.
And we have a special guest today, an expert on the character, Alan Sizzler Kistler. How are you?
Not too bad. How's my signal on your guys' end? It's a little garbled for me. I just want to make sure you guys can hear me and see me okay.
We could hear you. I think you're just a little delayed, but other than that, you're good.
Okay. Okay, I can deal with delay. long as you guys can hear me. And yeah, I'm a comic book historian. I've shown up in a number of DC Comics animated feature documentaries, and when you get the DC direct-to-DVD films or some of the collection films like Aquaman, New Frontier, the Blu-ray for Batman, Superman, Apocalypse, I'm in Batman and Son, and I'm in the upcoming Bad Blood in the special
Very
features. Cool. And yeah, I've been writing professionally about comic books and the evolution and history of their characters for about 9 years now. And I wrote the New York Times bestseller Doctor Who: A History and a trivia book on Batman a while back.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure.
So let's get right into it. Alan, Vandal Savage, who was he created by, and what's his origin story?
Well, he was created by Alfred Bester. He was also known for science fiction work outside of comics. And Martin Odell, who co-created, really was the main creator behind the original Green Lantern, Alan Scott. And Vandal Savage's first appearance was as an Alan Scott villain. And he was a scary, different kind of villain when he showed up. He was this incredibly vicious and manipulative mastermind who claimed to be, at that point, he claimed to be 1,000,000 years old in that first story. And he was immediately also a threat because he knew who Alan Scott was. He had figured out the Green Lantern's identity and was using this as part of his threat. And Green Lantern outsmarted him, but he showed up a couple more times in the Golden Age. He got together the original Injustice Society of the world to take on the Justice Society of America. And after that, he was one of those guys that certain writers saw potential, and a lot of people just didn't think to capitalize on it. So you saw him, I think, once in the 60s, a couple times in the 70s, and then like he actually showed up in a Superman story where Superman met a group called the Forgotten Heroes, and they were fighting these guys called the Forgotten Villains, and literally both teams were just made up of characters that hadn't been seen in years. So he was just like, oh yeah, and in that story they connected him to the other character, Immortal Man, and said that the same event that happened to Vandal Savage also made this guy semi-immortal, and so that became a new connection. And then the 90s is when a lot of different writers just sort of, after he made appearances in Rip Hunter Time Masters series, Vandal suddenly became a much bigger villain. A lot of other writers suddenly realized, oh yeah, if this guy's immortal and he's that smart, he must have been doing things all the time. And you know, his schemes, he's kind of like Ra's al Ghul, but less polite. And so they started using him in new ways. So the 90s really brought him much more up to supervillain status, and yeah, and since then he's been a fun character to explore.
Now, in your opinion, what makes him such a formidable villain in the comics?
I think part of it is that he's sort of doing this for fun. Really, it's the challenge. He thrives on conquest. It makes the blood rise, and that's different than Ra's al Ghul, where you have in his mind, a political and ecological reason for his war against humanity. So you can kind of see, yeah, you actually have a few good points. You're going about it completely the wrong way, and you're killing people, but I see what you're saying. Whereas Vandal Savage, as the name implies, is really just here to take on people. And there's a great line in DC 1 Million where he is telling someone that sometimes he's chilled out for a century or two because he was willing to wait for there to be people worthy of fighting, that there would be heroes worthy of taking down. And that's just a fun idea, that this guy would actually lay low for a while. Like, yeah, humanity can have its thing for a while. I'll wait until there's a superhero I feel like humiliating. That's a really fun character dynamic. Someone who's unapologetically evil is sometimes quite refreshing. And we've gotten to some creepy things with him where he's immortal, but he's not as immortal as he used to be. It seems to be waning now. They brought up the idea in the 90s that his regenerative powers have weakened slightly, so now he has to keep track of descendants of his bloodline, and that way he can use them as organ replacements. So Roy Harper, Arsenal, is actually a descendant of Vandal Savage, we found out. And so yeah, that suddenly you bring in a creepy vampire aspect to that. We've met his daughter, Scandal, who's awesome, and that expands the world as well. And it's just cool that there's so many different characters of different eras of the DC universe. It's nice to have certain links between them. And if you can say Vandal Savage is plaguing Batman, and Batman can then call the 1940s Green Lantern and say, well, does this case resemble anything you did? And you can have this essentially cross-time parallel adventure through a flashback into the modern-day story. There's a lot of potential there. We even saw him recently in the Return of Bruce Wayne miniseries, where Batman is basically scattered through time, and he gets back to the earliest tribe of humanity as far as DC Earth is concerned, and there's Vandal Savage under his original name, Vandar Ad, when he's a caveman of the Blood Tribe, and there's Batman fighting him. It's just great that Batman sort of goes back to the dawn of humanity, and there's still Vandal Savage there that you have to deal with. Plus, it's just to me he's sort of comics at its best, where it's a great threat, it's a terrifying threat, it's a threat you can absolutely use in a drama, in a serious sci-fi story. But his name is Vandal Savage, and that, if nothing else, that reminds you you're reading a comic book. It's like a guy calling himself Thug Ruffian, or Brute Overkill or something. It's hilarious. So, yeah.
On the comment of him waiting a century, I was doing a little bit of Savage reading before, and I know Jeff Johns gave him a line where he said, "And then I'll wait a century," which is just basically like 1 week to me.
So, yeah, and even in DC 1 Million, we saw these superheroes came from the 853rd century to visit our era, and at one point Vandal Savage shows up, and they all look shocked. Oh my God, a young Vandal Savage! And it was it's a great line. It's a great concept.
Kat, to you, what makes Vandal Savage such a scary guy?
Yeah, I think it's his experience, because he is immortal. He's been around for centuries and centuries and centuries. Again, century is only a week to him. And his suave, and that's why I'm really excited to see him in the show too, because it is a time travel show, Legends of Tomorrow. So I think it'll be interesting to see, hopefully in the show, that he'll be different in different centuries. I don't know how they're going to play Vandal Savage, and also that he just doesn't really care about humanity. He's savage, like Alan was saying. So yeah, I'm excited just to see a villain that just doesn't care. He doesn't really have this humanity to him, and I think that's gonna be a lot of fun to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know in the comics he's over 50,000 years old. Was the
yeah they scaled it down from his original claim of 1 million because
just a bit.
Makes more sense.
Yeah, someone realized, wait, science says that's impossible, and we do have certain things where we're willing to believe that a magic ring can create green flame in objects, but we know that humanity wasn't alive 1 million years ago, so no. And then depending on which comic you read, he's either one of the first humans, or he's actually a Cro-Magnon, and which is interesting. And I've always wondered why once we got into that idea, if he's one of the first evolved humans or pre-humans, then he should have much darker colored skin and not look like.
Sure.
Yeah, he should not look like a European. Not even European. He should not look like some British aristocrat from like the 19th century with white skin and the fluffy beard. He should be a darker colored guy. He should be brown or black. And I'm surprised they didn't change that in the New 52. But either way, he's like you were saying. He's the experience alone is so much fun, and the fact that he's even gotten some victories out there, or is able to not just immediately get jailed by every superhero he meets. That he is smart enough to keep them on their toes, makes him more interesting.
Yeah.
So let's delve into a little bit about his history with the characters who will be involved in Legends of Tomorrow. We know he has obviously some history with Wally West. At one point, I believe he was basically a drug dealer in the city, selling something which enhanced people's speed, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, Nitro 9.
Nitro 9.
Yeah, like I said, the late 80s, early 90s is when people started realizing, oh, actually, why don't we use this guy more often? And there had been enough speedsters now in the DC universe, especially after post-Crisis when they did that reboot. Suddenly, you were saying that the One Earth in DC Comics had not just the modern-day speedsters like the Flashes, but the original Flash and Johnny Quick and all that jazz. So basically the idea came, well, some scientist must have studied these people and must have tried to figure out how can we replicate that. So Vandal Savage had his boys whip up Nitro 9, which would temporarily give you super speed, but was an addictive drug. And it actually created a new villain, Speed Demon, the short-lived villain who was the love of Christina McGee, who some fans will know as Barry Allen's love interest from the 1990 TV show. And she recently showed up in a different form in The Flash Season 1.
Now, I have not read any examples, but I'm wondering, does he have any encounters in the comics with the likes of Captain Cold, Heatwave, Hawkgirl, Hawkman, Ray Palmer?
I mean, Ray Palmer and a couple of the others, he has encounters basically via the Justice League. If he's fighting the Justice League, he's fighting several of these people. Hawkman, absolutely. First, like I said, his early appearances were in the Golden Age, and after fighting Alan Scott a couple times, he fought the Justice Society, and by that point, Hawkman was the leader of the Justice Society. And so they definitely, as two leaders of two opposing teams, they were definitely butting heads. And then also, in the more modern comics, when we got into the idea that Hawkman and Hawkgirl have had multiple lives across time. Their origin was that they had been an Egyptian couple in ancient Egypt, and then they'd been reborn in the modern day. But then Jeff Johns said that in between those two lives there had been, I don't know how many, like 100 other lives, where they kept showing up, kept finding each other, kept becoming heroes, and he even connected them to some other older DC heroes. So we found out that they were the Western heroes, Nighthawk and Cinnamon, who you can see in a movie poster in an episode of Flash in Season 1. And so we later found out in a lot of these lives they have encountered Vandal Savage. So Vandal Savage has not just fought Hawkman and Hawkgirl in the comics, but has fought their previous incarnations as they've lived throughout the millennia. And in the comics, he would occasionally refer to Hawkman. Like, he came to realize these were the same people being reborn time and time again. And he referred to Hawkman as the cockroach.
Interesting. So, the New 52. I know he appeared primarily in Demon Knights, which I've heard nothing but praise, but unfortunately I have yet to get around to that. I know it's blasphemy on my part. I'm sorry. But I also read his encounter with Pandora. They had quite a violent encounter. But so I'm just wondering, what is it about his New 52 version that makes him different?
Well, the New 52 version, we haven't explored him too much in the modern day. We've explored him mainly in Demon Knights, which takes place during medieval times. And so we are seeing a younger Vandal Savage who, while in the 20th and 21st century stories he's usually interested in taking over, in the medieval time version of the DC Earth, that doesn't seem to be his game plan. This seems to be during one of his rest periods where he's just sort of waiting for interesting things to happen. And so he's actually, in that series, with the other champions and fighters that exist in the medieval version of DC's history, he's sort of more of an anti-hero, or he's sort of the heavy of the team, where you are aware he may betray you, you are aware he may cut and run if he decides this is boring or against his further agendas, but he doesn't actually have like an evil scheme happening. He's just sort of there like, oh, you guys are going to fight this person who's trying to take over. You guys are going to fight Mordru, the wizard. Cool, I don't like him either. I'll help you out. And that's just sort of it. He's just sort of looking for what's interesting to him. So it's a very different thing where, you know, you actually can trust him to a certain degree because fighting these other threats right now interest him. There is a scene at one point where he betrays the team and then later turns the tide again and says, oh yeah, that was my plan all along. And sort of up to you to decide if he actually did that because it would be fun, or if he did that and then decided, no, this is boring, I'm going to go back to my original team, and then decided to do the double blind. So yeah, it's an interesting take on, we get to really see a young Vandal Savage. He's not exactly the person we know of in the modern world, which is great because, you know, there are so many stories where when they do show an immortal villain, you don't see them change. The writers just decide that they were a consistent evil or good force, and to see them grow, or even just have, you know, a century where they try to do something new, is fun.
So before people begin watching Legends of Tomorrow, if you had to recommend a few issues or story arcs for people to read in order for them to get a proper understanding of the character, which would you recommend?
Should I recommend? I mean, if you can track down a couple of those Golden Age stories, I think they're fun as hell. If you can track down, there was a series in the '90s, Resurrection Man, which introduced yet another enemy for Vandal Savage, Mitch Shelley, who has also lived throughout the millennia. And Vandal naturally becomes a major part of that in the later issues. If you can track down, I mean, the whole series was fantastic, and everyone should read it. But if you can track down those last 5 issues, where it really delves into the history between Savage and Shelley and Immortal Man, that's really cool. DC 1 Million is a wild, out there story, and probably the best that we've ever used Vandal Savage on a large scale as a villain, because we've got him doing terrible things in the modern world, and then we've got future him doing terrible things to destroy the world of the 853rd century and possibly its history. So yeah, DC 1 Million is probably his biggest thing. Other than that, honestly, he's used here and there, but I find his most interesting stuff to be cameos with other villains, or when he's talking to certain other characters, like in Demon Knights, which is fun to see the character interaction, but it's not really a Vandal Savage story.
Kat, are there any Vandal Savage comics that you particularly enjoy?
Yeah, you know, from what I've been seeing, it seems like Vandal Savage, at least from the research I was doing, like Alan's saying, like he makes a lot of sporadic appearances at places, so it's a bit harder to track down. But if you want the most continuous, I go with Demon Knights, because he at least had like over 20 appearances there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so go with Demon Knights, or Trinity War he was in a little bit, so if you want some of the newer stuff, you could try that out.
Okay. For me, there was one issue that I really enjoyed. It was Justice Society of America #4 by Jeff Johns and Dale Eaglesham. It's Vandal Savage basically boasting about all the accomplishments not all of them, obviously, that would be way too many to list, but several of the accomplishments he's had over the years. Like he was saying he put Hitler into power, and then he's the one who put Hitler into a grave. And he was just saying why he wanted to control the Third Reich and now the fourth one. And he fought Wildcat and Wildcat's son. It was a very entertaining brawl. And it's just a lot of boasting on Vandal Savage's behalf. And I think even Ted Grant says something like, nobody likes a braggart, or something like that in the fight. So that was a short but fun appearance.
And that's another fun thing about Vandal Savage is because he is such a braggart, occasionally if certain stories contradict his claims, you can just say, yeah, he's a jerk. He's taking credit where he shouldn't. Because, I mean, he used to claim he was Blackbeard the Pirate, and later comics, including Return of Bruce Wayne, have shown that Blackbeard was a separate person. So you can, it's great to point out, like, oh, no, this is another lie you told because you like to sell yourself. You're a schmuck.
Didn't he also claim he invented cannibalism, or did someone else make that claim?
That's Luther. Luther said that there was, he had found evidence that Vandal Savage was the first recorded cannibal. But that he wasn't sure. Oh, another actually great story, not just Society, but JSA, back when that slightly older series, when Jeff Johns was writing that. I'm forgetting the title now.
I believe Savage Times, was that the story arc?
Yeah, where we go back to ancient Egypt, and so we're seeing Hawkman and Hawkgirl in their original lives, fighting Vandal Savage and a proto-metamorpho, and that was just a wild time. That was just good fun.
So before we get into Legends of Tomorrow and Casper Crump, who's the actor who has landed the role, let's talk just a little bit about Vandal Savage's appearances in other forms of media. He has appeared in Justice League Doom, Young Justice, several other projects. So first and foremost, I guess let's get into Justice League Doom, because if someone wants to watch something to get a decent understanding of the character, that's obviously a good suggestion. He is the big bad in that, and why don't you tell us a little, since you have been featured in several DC animated movies, why don't you go ahead and explain why you would recommend seeing Justice League Doom as a little Vandal Savage research?
Well, Justice League Doom is advantageous, and that's also a very straightforward story. And Dwayne McDuffie wrote that. That was his one of his last ones. I talked to him about it a while back before he passed away, and it's a very straightforward adaptation of a Justice League comic book story, the Tower of Babel, combining it with a modern take on the Legion of Doom idea from the superhero cartoons, the Super Friends. And yeah, if you have never really encountered Vandal Savage before, it's a great intro because the opening premise is he gets a bunch of villains together, introduces himself, and says, this is what we're going to do. And it is a huge, global threatening scheme, certainly worthy of an immortal villain who just gets bored from century to century and needs to do something to shake things up. It's got really fun reinterpretations of some of the bad guys in it. Its version of Mirror Master, I wish, was in the comics. I think they had such a wild interpretation of Mirror Master. And yeah, it's also got, above all that, it's got the performance of Phil Morris, who is a fine actor. He was Martian Manhunter in the Smallville television series. He was the funny lawyer whose name I'm forgetting, but who was supposed to reference Johnny Cochran in Seinfeld. Phil Morris is just a solid actor, and he gave a really nice sophistication, but still underneath he is Savage idea to Vandal. And Phil Morris also voiced him in the Justice League Unlimited and Justice League cartoons of the series, which you can find on Netflix. And yeah, anytime Vandal Savage showed up in those cartoons, it was actually pretty great. One of them, Hereafter, there's a two-parter in Justice League called Hereafter where it basically looks like Superman's died. and in fact he's sent somewhere else, and then encounters Vandal Savage. And it's really a fascinating exploration of yet another possible version of Vandal Savage, one who does not match the current day incarnation, but you can see the connection. You can see how A became B.
And he's also appeared several times in Young Justice. Kat, I know you're a big fan of that show, so would you like to talk in detail about Vandal's role in that show?
Yes, I will. I feel like that's what I always talk about on this show, Young Justice, anytime I can get a chance.
Hey, it was a great show, and Greg Weisman's a pal of mine, so I'm always happy to plug friends' work. Like, he did an amazing job with that.
Yeah, Greg Weisman's a great guy, a great creator, and it's such a shame that show did not last as long as it should have. And actually talking about that, that brings me to Vandal Savage having a big part, honestly, in the last episode of Young Justice, where throughout the show he is part of the light. You know, there's big villains part of the light, Queen Bee, Lex Luthor, all these different people. But yeah, the biggest part I would say is when Vandal Savage goes to Darkseid and says, "Hey, you know what's next? You know, you're part of this too." So now we know Darkseid's a big part of the Light's plan, and then it ends that way. So we don't know what happens next. But I would say that was one of the bigger parts of Vandal Savage. And yeah, so honestly, I think Vandal Savage and Darkseid would have had a bigger part in season 3. But it's a shame we can't talk about it because there wasn't a season 3. Well, Alan, you like Young Justice too. Is there anything else I missed that you think was a big part for Vandal Savage in Young Justice?
I just think one thing we really haven't talked on, any of us, is another fun idea with Vandal, and you do see this in certain other immortal villains, is that because they have immortality, because they have time, they are people who often, or at least sometimes rather, have long-reaching plans. And it was a fun idea that you would see in Young Justice where they thought, oh, we stopped the villain's plan. And actually it's like, no, you stopped part 3 of my 7-part plan. The other 2 parts ahead of that and the 2 parts after that have gone fine, and the next couple parts after that we're going to put into motion soon. So, yeah, you screwed over that part, but the wheels are still turning, and we've got things going on. And that's a great threat to have. I mean, that just touches into primal fears we constantly see in fiction, science fiction, over and over again in fantasy, about the Illuminati, about the conspiracy behind the scenes where you thought you won the battle and you only took on, you know, one piece of it, and that's a great thing to play with. And Young Justice did that very effectively with Vandal.
Yeah, definitely.
Oddly enough, one appearance by him in the show that I remember quite well, he was just a pawn. He basically owed Count Vertigo a favor to stall Kid Flash just for a little bit.
Yeah.
Encountered in a short fight, and Kid Flash was literally racing against the clock, and he wised up and realized, I can't afford to keep wasting time fighting this guy. I believe that episode is called Cold-Blooded or Cold-Hearted.
Cold-Hearted. I remember he was getting a heart to somebody else. Cold-Hearted.
Speaking of specific episodes, if someone wants to, it's on Netflix, Young Justice. So if
the first season is season 2 on.
I think it's only the first season.
Only the first. Okay. Are there any episodes?
Get on that.
Get on Blu-ray.
Are there any specific episodes you would recommend from the first season for someone to check out?
I think he was in Invasion more. Well, but besides Cold-Hearted, I think he was more in the second season. I think.
Also, Young Justice is really, you should watch that in order. Like it's something that every episode builds on the previous one. It's a good enough show that watch it all. Screw it.
Fair point. So let's move into now to Legends of Tomorrow. What are your thoughts on Casper Crump landing the role?
I think he's a good actor. Again, I keep thinking if you're going to have an early human from humanity, then darker skin and someone who doesn't have. I just was hoping for a person of color to be in the role. That being said, I have no idea what they're going to do with Vandal Savage. I have no idea what origin he's going to have. They could be doing their own thing. I mean, Ra's al Ghul, I had a problem with the casting in Arrow. Nothing against the actor. He was a good actor. It's just, but it's a Middle Eastern villain. Why wouldn't you just do that? Especially with how many white faces are already on the screen. But they sort of sidestepped that by saying that in their version there have been many Ra's al Ghuls, and this is the latest. Like, okay, like it's not an explanation I'm thrilled with, but I'll accept it. So I have no idea what they're going to do with this Vandal Savage. Maybe he'll be like a mortal man in the comics, where he basically regenerates every life, and so we'll see a bunch of different actors play Vandal Savage. I have no idea. I am just excited to have Vandal Savage in a TV show, because it's not something I really expected to see. I mean, but Flash and Arrow, especially Flash, have been doing things that I never really expected to see in live-action television for superhero stuff, because so many of these ideas I thought would be too far out or too silly for them to try.
Gorilla Grodd, I
assume. They're doing it. Yeah. Yeah, the fact that the show is unapologetically showing you a telepathic evil gorilla, like, yes. Yes. Here's a villain who has the guts to call himself Captain Cold. Awesome.
Let's keep seeing it. And hopefully we will in Season 4, Season 2, and Season 1 of Legends Tomorrow.
Not a lot has been released about the character, but I do know that they said he's around 6,000 years old in the show. So I believe I think they may have commented on him saying, he's very evil and will be, the most imposing villain yet or something. But, yeah, the big takeaway was he's 6,000 years old, not over 50,000 years old. So we're dealing with a less experienced Vandal Savage here.
Still experienced, though.
Yes. So, Kat, what do you think about Casper Crump?
I think he looks the part from what we've seen with Vandal Savage in the comics. I think he looks menacing, which is important. And from what I've seen with social media with him, he seems really excited about the part. And I think that's a big part with superhero shows and, something with a big fandom like Legends Tomorrow in DC. It's like you want to see the actor be excited about it too, want to learn more about the character. And it seems like Casper Crump is very excited about it and wants to learn more about the character. So I'm excited about that, him as an actor being so involved. And yeah, he looks the part for me. I haven't seen anything previously from him, but I am super excited to see him as Vandal Savage. I think he could be kind of like the John Barrowman, how he has the suave to him in Arrow. I think Vandal Savage will have that also, the suave, but in a different way for Vandal Savage.
Yeah, I saw what you were talking about on Twitter. He shared that he was reading Kingdom Come. Vandal Savage doesn't have a big role in that comic, but it's still a great comic, so it's good that he's reading it. Yeah, I haven't seen any of his previous performances. I'm curious what the character's voice will sound like, whether or not he'll have an accent. But yeah, he certainly looks like the comic book counterpart. He gives off the kind of guy who quite experienced, quite wise, but also quite intimidating. And I think that'll be important for the character. So what do you really hope to see from Crump's performance that'll make you say, yes, this is a great version of Vandal Savage?
Alan, you want to go first?
Sorry, you were breaking up a bit there. I didn't hear the question.
Oh, sorry about that. I'll repeat it. So basically, in your opinion, what do you really want to see from Casper Crump's performance? What can he do that'll make you say that is a great version of Vandal Savage?
I mean, I have faith in what the show will bring across. This show, the people who've been making this show, Berlanti, Johns worked on Flash. They've done such a great job of creating versions that are connected to the comic book incarnations, but are also not afraid to be their own thing. So I'm really looking forward to seeing a new take on Vandal Savage, where I recognize the roots, but it's going to be their Vandal Savage. And I hope the only thing I hope I don't see is a copy of what we've already seen with Ra's al Ghul. I don't want to see that kind of mannerism, that kind of portrayal, because I've now seen that. I saw that for a full season in Arrow. So we're going from one semi-immortal villain to perhaps a truly immortal villain. Let's make sure, you wouldn't mistake them for each other. And I have faith that we will not. I have faith that we will have something more entertaining than that.
What about you, Cap?
Yeah, I think Alan's, I totally agree with Alan. I want to see kind of a different type of Vandal Savage, but still have the roots. And I think Arrow and Flash have done that perfectly with a lot of their characters, making them different, but still have the roots of what us comic book fans really enjoy about a character. And, now that Vandal Savage is a bit younger in the show, I want to see how that affects things. I hope he's still menacing. I want that. And again, the actor looks so perfect for that. So that's what I hope. I don't want him to be like, oh, like I like this team. Like, this is so cool. I want him not to like the team at all. Nothing about humanity. I want him to be vicious, and hopefully we see that. And I think we will. So I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, definitely. And Alan touched on one point that was going through my mind was there are some parallels between Ra's al Ghul and Vandal Savage, and seeing as he was just the big bad in Arrow, you of course want a villain who brings out different parts of the story, brings out different character dynamics. You want someone who's... Yes.
Yeah, one immediate difference there is that Ra's al Ghul tends to set himself up as a religious figure.
Mm-hmm.
So his soldiers are religious followers as well. They see him as the savior. Vandal Savage... we later had some stories that said he was basically the inspiration for the biblical story of Cain. So you did get into some followers there in Final Crisis Revelation. But beyond that, normally his attitude is, I'm not a religious thing. I'm not chosen by God or fate to lead you into a better tomorrow. I'm just better than you. So, deal. And I love that attitude.
So we're probably dealing with someone who, if they're going into the future and it seems like he has an army on his side, we're probably dealing with someone who is taken over by force and influenced change on a political level.
I think that would be a more straightforward army than a cult of religious followers. Again, if it's a cult of religious followers, it gets too close to Ra's al Ghul and the League of Shadows, the League of Assassins.
The League of Vandal Savage.
Yeah.
Let's hope not.
Yeah. So, why do we believe he is a fitting villain for Legends of Tomorrow? Obviously, this is a show that'll aim to separate itself from Arrow and Flash, two shows who do very different things, of course. So, Legends of Tomorrow is seeming to be more of a time-hopping adventure. So, what is it, aside from being an immortal, that makes Vandal Savage a great choice for this story?
That is the primary thing. Because he is immortal, you can have that common link. If you're doing a time travel show or even a time travel miniseries, then you can either have them as separate adventures and there's only the emotional arc that's connecting them, of the characters, or you have a literal link where you're encountering the same people, either because they're also time travelers or because they're in those different eras. And they chose that route. And it's also fun because by having him there, by having him be immortal, it's very likely that Rip Hunter has already met him in the future. And so Rip Hunter might have a history with him. But yeah, the immortality is exactly why he's a good villain for this. And the fact that if they go with the comics, he's not changeless, could be a fun way to then have the actor stretch his wings by showing different versions of the same character, how he will be different in different eras. I hope, as someone who came up in theater and through writing, that's immediately, I find that more interesting than if he was just the same in every era, but with a different costume.
Kat, what about you?
Yeah, I think the time travel part of the show is what's interesting and why we want to see Vandal Savage, because he is immortal, and hopefully we will see different versions of him. Like we were talking a little bit earlier in the show too, seeing that he has changed over time. Obviously, we still want him to be a villain. We don't want him to be good at all, but we do want to see him change and throughout the time periods, because I think that's what's going to be really interesting about this show, is that we're going to see the future, we're going to see the past, and be cool to see that. So also having characters like Rip Hunter and then Hawkgirl and Hawkman, who are time travel characters too, and have their characters connected to time. It's interesting to see how all these characters are going to interact. So yeah, I'm excited about it, and I think Vandal Savage is the perfect pick. When I heard he was going to be the villain, I'm like, yeah, that's obvious.
Well, also, if you're going to do time travel, the other thing would be, like, DC has lots of villains across lots of different eras. Mm-hmm. So you could have done that, but you have to hire more actors then. You have to do more costume fittings then. You have to, if any of them have powers, add more special effects. So it's frankly also saving costs to just have one person and say, yeah, he's in all these different time eras.
Yeah, true. Very true.
So I was going to get in which characters you'd like to see him interact with on the team, but one thing that keeps crossing my mind is Captain Cold and Heatwave. They are obviously not exactly good guys on the team, so I'm wondering, do you think at any point Vandal Savage will reach out to them, try to get them on his side?
I'm sure he'll reach out to a few people, not just the obvious villains, but Vandal Savage is a wheeler and dealer, and in the comics he's constantly offered rewards or promises to heroes as well, of just, look, you can't beat me because 3 centuries from now you'll be forgotten and I'll still be here. So what's the harm in just let me go this time, or let me just steal this one thing, which, trust me, won't even affect anyone you're dealing with because this plan doesn't go into effect until 75 years from now. Like, you can really play that with any of them. So, I could see him reaching out to them. I could see him reaching out to Hawkgirl as someone who might understand her, having known her in a previous life. I could see him reaching out to Firestorm as, doesn't it suck that even though you guys are heroes, you still have to be fusing together all the time? I could see him reaching out to White Canary as, I've had near-death experiences too. I get this.
Kat?
Yeah, I think a big one's gonna be Sarah, because Sarah, she's a White Canary now. She wants to be redeemed, but Vandal Savage is like, oh well, you were this dark person before. You can't be redeemed. I think he's gonna be playing with Sarah's mind more than. Although I think he will target Captain Cold and Heatwave too. I feel like they're the obvious, but I think Sarah might be the one that's most targeted because of her past.
I could also see him less interested in Captain Cold and Heatwave because they're mainly interested in money.
Mm-hmm.
And in sort of like the glory of being villains, whereas Vandal's promises would be more, the first thing they're going to do is, well, how much are you paying? And then because of that means there's not going to be a lot of loyalty. So I think Savage would have more luck reaching out to people where they might agree we have the same agenda, or you can help me with my end goal.
Mm-hmm.
One other question I was going to ask, like you were saying, he tends to collaborate a lot.
Sure.
Is there perhaps a wish list of characters you would like to see on Team Savage? Obviously, the show's still, in the very early stages. We haven't heard all the casting announcements yet. For example, I'm wondering if maybe in one era we can see his daughter, Scandal. Maybe she'll be by his side, or she'll even help the team at one point. Are there any characters you would really like to see brought into the fold?
Oh, man. Go on, Al.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see Scandal. I'd love to see, if we visit a future era of Savage, I'd love to see him maybe working with Kadabra. That would be a great way to bring in the Flash villain Kadabra into play. The Metamorpho idea would be fun. I don't know if you'd have the budget for that with how many powers you're already dealing with on this show. It'd be fun to see him dealing with, if you have a Wild West adventure, dealing with some of the Wild West villains who plagued Jonah Hex and Nighthawk and Cinnamon, like the Gentleman Ghost, before he's a ghost. Yeah, any of those. If we can get some of the World War II baddies, Baron Blitzkrieg or something. I would say Paula von Gunther, but she's such a Wonder Woman character. I would feel wrong seeing her without Wonder Woman. Yeah, there are lots you can pick and choose. I think.
Oh, would be interesting because there have been so much teasing for Green Lantern. How about Alan Scott? Like, surprise Alan Scott in the show, which they might do more towards Arrow of Flash because you have Jay Garrick in Flash.
I mean, I would love that, but since they're already demonstrating that Jay lives on a parallel Earth, I'm guessing Alan would live there too. And also, like, the Green Lantern stuff might be off the table now. Some people are saying because the movies are starting to do their own plans and don't want any kind of brand confusion or something, which I hope is wrong because they've already set up so many teases for Hal to show up in the next seasons, and that would be such a waste otherwise. But yeah, hero-wise, I would love to see that. I would love to see someone indicating that they're Dr. Fate. They're the Spectre you could play with very easily. Because you don't even have to go full Spectre. You can just show some cop in the 1930s, 1940s who obviously has a grudge against Savage, and at some point seems to do spooky things or seems to walk through walls, and you can just indicate that that's the Spectre. So yeah, I mean, it's again, the DC Universe has such a lovely history and spans so many ideas. There are a lot you can play with.
Yeah.
Kat, were there any, aside from Alan Scott, that you would like to see?
Honestly, just Alan Scott. I feel like that'd be so cool. And time travel, plays close with parallel worlds.
No,
sometimes.
if they had a way to do it, because I love, he's my favorite Green Lantern. I love Alan Scott. And they were the first enemies.
True. Yeah, no, that's exactly why. Like, I feel like it would be kind of a cool nod.
Yeah.
And then if you can't use Hal, like, we don't know if Alan's going to be in the new Green Lantern Corps movie. Probably not, honestly.
Oh, he's not.
Use him instead.
We know that. He's not. Yeah.
Exactly. So he might be on the table more because he's not going to be in that movie. So you never know. Hopefully, I just want to see some Green Lantern. They keep promising us. Come on.
Well, I'm sure we won't see a full appearance from someone like Hal Jordan or John Stewart, but perhaps a very...
We might get Carol, because they've been hinting at that too, that new love interest for Oliver, who's going to be... We might get to see Carol. I'd be excited about that.
Yeah, I could see a lesser-known GL, or perhaps even just an Easter egg that further acknowledges his existence, because they had the very blunt one, or Chip. They had the very blunt one of, a pilot went missing, and so obviously they're... Yes.
No, I think at that point they were planning on Arrow Season 4 flashbacks would have him meet Hal as this pilot, and then leading up to Hal's disappearance in the flashback. I hope that was the plan. I would like to see it become the plan at some point. Because it's just, it's Ollie and Hal and Barry have such a wonderful relationship as a trio, so I'd love to see that on screen.
Yeah, I wonder if they would be able to do that, if they can kind of make a deal where we'll use Hal Jordan, but we won't show him as Green Lantern. We'll tease
Which you can easily do. Yeah, you can easily do that.
Yeah, because I know they had bigger plans with Harley Quinn, but those were shot down. They only had the quick cameo, and then I guess...
My buddy wrote that.
Really?
My buddy Brian Q. Miller wrote that episode and got to do that.
Awesome. I love his writing.
Brian's a great guy. Yeah, he's excellent.
So, speaking of The Flash and Arrow, we know Vandal Savage will make his first appearance in the upcoming crossover episode, but they haven't elaborated. Do you think he'll kind of just be there as a teaser, essentially, for Legends of Tomorrow, someone who's kind of behind the scenes, and then maybe on a cliffhanger he makes his presence known, or do you think they'll just full out have him come out as, someone who has a noticeable presence and a blatant, promotion for... if you want more, watch Legends of Tomorrow.
I mean, I think we, the audience, will definitely see him, and we'll know, like I was saying earlier, oh, you stopped this plan, but there's more to come. Whether they encounter him directly, I don't know. But we, the audience, will definitely see him, because, yeah, that's exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be a huge jumping-off point of, hey, there's another show coming up if you want to see more of this weird dude. Watch that.
Kat, what are you hoping to see in the crossover from Savage?
Yeah, I mean, I hope it's not one of those cliffhangers where it's just like that's the only cliffhanger of the episode. It's like, oh, here's Vandal Savage. Like, of course we know he's going to show up. So don't make that the only thing. That'd be the last moment. I want to be like maybe the second to last moment, you know, that we have another cliffhanger too. Like something to surprise us. Like, because Vandal Savage is not a surprise at this point.
I was going to ask about how you would like to see Crump portray Vandal Savage's personality, but you guys brought up a great point about how you're hoping to see the character change throughout the years. You don't want a constant Vandal Savage, someone who is the same in every time era, hoping to see the character evolve and change.
Yeah, but, he's an actor. Let him act.
Yeah.
Fair point. Yeah. So what do you think are the key qualities though that you definitely need to see Casper Crump sell very well to come off as a convincing and memorable Vandal Savage?
I think we've both really gone over that, and Kat brought it up. That no matter what, he is a bad guy who likes violence and digs throwing his weight around. That's got to be there. It's sort of like with Doctor Doom when certain writers portray Doctor Doom as an aristocrat. I get bothered. Like, no, he's pretending to be an aristocrat, but he's a thug, and he will turn on you and kill you in a rage if you just tick him off, or if he decides you're not really worth it. You've got to have that with Vandal Savage. He may dress as a gentleman and talk about wine vintages, but we've also seen him kill someone who brought him coffee because it wasn't hot enough, and he was bored. Like, that's the kind of cat he is.
Kat, what about you? Any final comments on what you hope to see from Crump as Vandal Savage?
Yeah, something I've just been mentioning throughout the podcast. Just like let him have that suave. Let him, I want him to have a presence on screen. Yeah. And I think he will. I think it looks like Casper Crump definitely has that presence. So that's something we need to see, and I think we will see.
Okay. So one last time, to help people prepare for the show, what are some things you would recommend them doing? I recommend Justice Society of America #4, Jeff Johns issue. I think that's it's a good showing of his personality, and he cites a lot of his alleged accomplishments, and it's just a fun fight with him and Wildcat and his son. But what would you two recommend that people really should try to do before the show airs?
Go for it.
No, you go first.
Just check out Young Justice. Check out Justice League Doom, and definitely watch on Netflix the Justice League cartoon episodes Hereafter and Savage Time. And Maid of Honor.
Demon Knights, if you want a recent one, of course, Young Justice. Someone we didn't mention, but I always like to talk about Smallville a bit. He did make an appearance, kinda, as Dean Cain. So if you're watching Supergirl, Dean Cain's gonna be in that show, and if you want to see him kinda as Vandal Savage, go ahead and watch Smallville Pure. Pretty sure it was a season 7 episode, I'm pretty sure. So
yeah, and his initials were still CK in that episode, which I thought were really cute.
Yeah. So check that out. That's pretty much it.
Okay. Alan, is there anything you'd like to plug?
You can find archives of my work at alankistler.com. That's ALANKISTLER.com. You can find me on Twitter at Sizzler Kistler. I host the podcast Crazy Sexy Geeks, which you can find on iTunes and Stitcher and SoundCloud. And check out the New York Times bestseller, Doctor Who: A History.
And while we have you for a minute, since you have been involved in the special features of the direct-to-video DC animated projects, I can't help but wonder, what are your 3 favorite DC animated movies? I know it's often tough to narrow them down to just 3. But if you had to recommend just 3.
Crisis on Two Earths, I think, is brilliant. I think that's a great science fiction film, not just a good superhero film. It's also a good introduction to the Justice League if you've never watched Justice League story before. But I think Dwayne McDuffie just hit it out of the park with that. The cast is great, the editing is great, the direction is great. After, trying to think what else after that. I mean, Mask of the Phantasm is still my favorite Batman film, period. That came out in the 90s, and I remember watching it in the theater, and that was brilliant. And after that, I think it's not necessarily a best, it's sort of what you're in the mood for. I've recently been rewatching Superman the Elite,
where the animation's a little funky for me. I know what they were trying to do, but I think the story is really great and very topical because it is Superman dealing with people who think he is old-fashioned for not killing and being more aggressive with his enemies, and it very directly tackles that topic based on the comic book story What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way, where it pointed out exactly why Superman is not a character who embraces killing.
Now, Kat, before we get into plugs, are there 3 that you would like to recommend?
Yeah, for the top of my head, I love Wonder Woman. I think it's a great movie. It's under.
Oh, so good.
So good. Honestly, if they were to make a live-action movie, I wish they could just use that script. But that's a great one. Under the Red Hood is really good. And I know this one's a bit of a debatable one because I know not everyone loved it, but I really liked All-Star Superman. I thought it was really good. So those are, I guess, my top 3 at the moment. I probably have more, but that's what I would say.
For me, Woman, Under the Red Hood, and like you said, Superman versus the Elite. Really love all 3 of those. Okay, now time for plugs. Please remember to like us on Facebook, facebook.com/Legends of Tomorrow Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Legends_podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email us at thelegendsoftomorrowpodcast@gmail.com. And please remember to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and YouTube. And if you do, don't forget to please give us a review. We're interested in hearing your feedback. And if you happen to love other DC TV shows, which we hope you are interested in some of the other ones as well, then please check out DCTVpodcast.com. I'm Greg.
I'm Kat.
I'm Alan.
That was a terrible ending. I apologize.
It's my
first time being the moderator. So basically, thank you for listening.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
That was a